All right. Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming. We're excited to speak with Dr. Maroon today, and he's really excited to share with all of you his story, his time when he was at a truck stop because of a situation with burnout earlier in his career. And so, yeah, I will give it up to Dr. Maroon if you want to introduce yourself a little bit more as a UPMC neuroscientist and everything.
Sure. I'm Joe Maroon, and I'm just trying to figure this out here just a second. Um, 1 second. Hey, Kat, could you come here just a second? There we go.
Oh, you good? Okay.
And how do I get rid of this, Kat? Up here.
If you just move your cursor out of the way, it'll go away in a few seconds.
Okay. So, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a real pleasure to join you today. And I'm a neurosurgeon here at the University of Pittsburgh. I have been around for quite a few years. I've initially went to the University of Indiana and then residency at the University of Vermont, Georgetown, and Oxford University in England, and then came to the University of Pittsburgh about 100 years ago. And subsequently became involved with the Pittsburgh Steelers. I've been the team physician for them for 30 years. And I'm also the medical director for WWE. And I know all of you watch Raw and SmackDown every Friday and Monday nights, and that's WWE. But I've had a lot of experience with athletics. But what this talk is going to be about is really burnout, overcoming adversity, and building resilience, which at the level that you are, beginning into an odyssey, an incredible voyage, a journey. I'm going to share with you really personal experiences. You know, there's a saying that data tells, but stories sell. And I'm going to tell you some stories, personal successes, personal failures, and also how to build resilience. And unfortunately, we can only build resilience when we are challenged with adversity. So sometimes adversity, as they say, is the best teacher. So, and you know, what is a teacher? I really believe this sums up what I'm going to try to do for you today. A teacher, I'm not a wise man, but a teacher is one who is a finger directing attention to the reality that surrounds us. And basically what I'm going to emphasize throughout is awareness, like the Buddhists say, awareness, mindfulness, being in the moment, being aware of what you're seeing, what you're experiencing, and urge you to keep a journal, if you would, a daily journal, and pertinent observations that you make during the day. Someday they may really come back and be very valuable for you. So I'm going to summarize some of the issues that I'm projecting that might be pertinent to your experiences and also your development. And the first is, what is physician burnout? We hear it used all over: overworked, overwhelmed, overcommitted, overstressed. Anybody listening to this feel in those domains? Well, it's extremely common. The incidence of physician burnout in women in particular is over 50%, but in men it's 30 to 45% as well. And it's very prevalent in medical students. And this is an article not too long ago from JAMA a few years back about suicidal ideation, depression, again, overworked, overcommitted, burnout. And you can see the prevalence of depression in students is as high as 27%. So that means 1 in every 4 people watching this is suffering from depression, anxiety syndrome of some kind. So I'm emphasizing this as, again, the finger pointing to reality around us, and to be aware and cognizant of these particular points and factors. And most of you are probably familiar with the work of Daniel Goldman, who wrote the book Emotional Intelligence. And I emphasize to you as well, we're dealing with individuals watching this has the highest IQ of almost any profession. You're all having incredible hard drives, but people with high IQs can be stunningly poor pilots of their private lives. And I'm going to talk about that myself. I don't have the highest IQ, but I at times have been a stunningly poor pilot of my own professional life. And I'm going to go back quite a few years and kind of begin at the end with William Osler. And I don't know how many of you have heard of William Osler, the physician from Canada who was the professor at the University of Pennsylvania and also formed the first department of medicine at Johns Hopkins University in the late 1800s. And he gave a valedictorian address to the medical students at Penn entitled Equanimitas. And I would urge you, if you ever have any free time, to look up this address, because it's a profound statement of how we should conduct ourselves as physicians. And he urged the students in his address to cultivate that judicious measure of equanimity that will enable you to confront the exigencies, the hardships, the difficulties of medical school, of practice, and life without at the same time hardening the human heart by which we live. And I wrote a paper, I gave an address to the American College of Surgeons last year entitled From Icarus to Equanimitas, that you might want to Google and look up. That is a good summary of some lessons learned the hard way. And you all remember who Icarus was. Icarus was a mythological creature imprisoned on an island, the island of Crete, with his father, Daedalus, the greatest architect in ancient Greece at the time. And they were imprisoned with the Minotaur, the half man, half lion bull. And to escape, Daedalus constructed wings made of feathers from the birds in the area and also wax. But he cautioned his son, and I'm cautioning each one of you, when you attain flight and you're looking down on the mere mortals of the population, there's a tendency to develop hubris, overinflated pride, overinflated ego, and soar higher and higher. And what Icarus did, he developed hubris, got too near the sun, it melted the wax, and he plummeted into the sea. Well, I've given a lot of thought about the tale of Icarus, because I've seen this happen to surgeons, to physicians, an awful lot of times. And one of the things we learned very early in medical school many years ago, when I was a student, were the 3 A's of success in medicine: availability, affability, and ability. And these, when you're applying for a residency, when you're applying for anything in the future, these 3 qualities are going to determine in large extent whether you get accepted into the residency program you want. But there are also 3 A's of failure. And the 3 A's of failure are arrogance, avariciousness, seeking too much money, and also adversarial conduct, being pugnacious, arguing, and knowing when to hold, not knowing when to hold and when to fold. So given that preamble, I'll give you my own success and failure story that maybe you can learn a few things from. So when I finished my medical school, I went to Indiana University, and subsequently Vermont, Georgetown, Oxford. And I wanted to be the very best neurosurgeon that I could be. And I came to the University of Pittsburgh and I was appointed chief of neurosurgery here at Presby, and was doing really, I thought, very good research with profound hypothermia, literally draining the blood out of patients, clipping their aneurysms and putting the blood back in, as well as other things. And I was appointed neurosurgical consultant, the first in the NFL actually, to the Steelers. So everything was going absolutely fantastic the way I planned, well, not planned, but the way I wanted it to go. And recently I came across this book, Hiking with Nietzsche by John Kagg, a professor of history at the University of Massachusetts. And he said, most of modern life is geared towards attaining success. And in our society, success is prestige, power, money, status. I had it all by the time I was 40 years of age or so, that only after it is attained at times does its hollowness become painfully aware. And I'm going to illustrate that for you in terms of what happened to me in terms of emotional exhaustion, depersonalization, depression, cynicism, and what I'm sure some of you already feel now, kind of a burnout situation. And I also subsequently learned that, again, as I alluded to before, sometimes adversity is the best teacher, even though we don't choose it, but also at times all things must suffer, go dark, and perish before they can live again. So having attained the success in athletics and this and that here and professionally, there was a train wreck that I encountered. And I was in my early 40s. And within the course of a week, my father died of a massive heart attack at age 60. My wife left in the middle of winter because of very good reasons. My job, my work was all consuming. And I had to quit neurosurgery and literally move into with my mother. My father bequeathed her a dilapidated truck stop in Dallas Pike, West Virginia, down by Wheeling. And one day I was doing awake brain surgery in patients, doing electrical stimulation of their cortex in patients with eloquently placed tumors, or tumors placed in eloquent areas of the brain. And the next day, I was literally, next week, living in this farmhouse in the middle of winter and working in this truck stop, filling up 18-wheelers, flipping hamburgers, and wondering what in the world happened that had me go from, again, doing brain surgery, awake brain surgery, to this. And another quote that's very pertinent, Sir James Barrie in England wrote, "The life of every man is a diary in which he means to write one story and writes another. His humblest hour is when he compares the volume as it is with what he vowed to make it." And each one of you right now is writing your own life story. And circumstances of all sorts will occur that may change that story as you go. And it can be very humbling when you look back in whatever number of years and you find, hey, this isn't what I meant to write. So what I was completely unaware of is the stress that I was under and how to deal with it. And you know from physiology that stress is an extremely damaging, deleterious factor that affects all of us. And uncontrolled, there's the release of cortisol through the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. And what this does to our brain, it's neurotoxic. results in anxiety, depression, and suppresses our immune system, and is extremely dangerous if not dealt with in a healthy way. And as I said, it's neurotoxic to the hippocampus in particular, which is the center for memory, the repository of memory. So people with chronic stress really have impaired memory due to neurotoxic effects on the hippocampal cells. So I'm living in a farmhouse, I'm working, filling up 18-wheelers, and wondering, what am I going to do in my mid-40s? How am I going to get out of this? Well, I still had no idea. I was working with a psychiatrist on various psychotropic drugs, which didn't help. And then I picked up this book that really changed my life. It was written by William Danforth and actually given to me as a high school award as a senior for someone who had leadership qualities. And William Danforth dared the reader to lead a balanced life. And right now, I'm going to dare each one of you to take out a pen and pencil, piece of paper, or even in your mind, I want you to do the following. I want you to draw a square. And you see the work, relationships, spirituality, and physical. Now, I want you to draw a line commensurate with how much effort you put on each one of these daily. So how long is your work line? How much into relationships and family? What about spirituality? And what about the physical side of your square? Well, this is what my square looked like. It was a flat line, almost a flat line EKG, as you see below. There was the relationships were completely atrophic. Spirituality was almost absent. And I was 20 pounds overweight, really not paying much attention to the physical side of my square and my physical health. And this is another really good book that I picked up recently by Ryan Holiday. The obstacle is the way, and it goes back to sometimes adversity can be the best teacher. It's the obstacles that we face that can make us much better, more aware, and more mindful of what we're doing. So what motivated me, what motivates you to get out of the moods that we get into that aren't healthy? Depression, anxiety, OCD, which you have to have or you wouldn't be where you are today. And so for me, I was completely ineffectual with my own mind, trying to work my way out of it. And what happened is the banker who held the mortgage on the truck stop called me one day and said, "Hey, Joe, let's go for a run." I said, "A run? I'm 20 pounds overweight. I can hardly walk up a flight of stairs without being dyspneic." But I found a pair of shoes, an old pair of scrubs, went down to this track in Wheeling, West Virginia. I made it around 4 times and was exhausted. I said, never again. I was painful, short of breath. But that night, a remarkable thing happened. It was the first night I slept in about 3 or 4 months. And I went back the next day myself, and I did 1.25 miles. Then the third day, 1.5 miles, and very gradually over time, I increased the ability and build up significantly to the point where I subsequently learned to swim. I got a bike. And at that time, triathlons were just really coming into vogue. And I signed up for a Tin Man triathlon after several months. And I finished it, and I felt like Roger Bannister breaking the 4-minute mile. It was just an incredible, exhilarating factor. And I subsequently continued to increase my endurance, and eventually was accepted into the Ironman triathlon in Hawaii. And as you know, you don't know, I was able to finish it, but I subsequently, the Ironman is a 2.4 mile ocean swim, 112 mile bike, followed by a marathon. And I've subsequently been able to do 5 of those in Hawaii and then 8 internationally, New Zealand and Canada, Germany. And actually last fall, I completed and won my age group in Columbus, Ohio. But I have to be honest with this group that I was the only one in my age group in Columbus, Ohio. But I'm telling you this not to be braggadocious or tout my own horn. I'm telling you this because this never would have happened had I not rebalanced my neurotransmitters by taking that single 4-lap run, jog, crawl around the high school track. So let's look at each side of the square and take a few minutes to do that. The physical and nutritional side of the square. So what was happening to my brain when I started to increase my physical activity? Well, I increased my BDNF. What does that molecule do in the brain? Well, it creates new neurons, enhances synaptogenesis, and enhances brain plasticity. I was forming endogenous serotonin, acetylcholine, which enhances memory, my dopamine, feel-good hormone, norepinephrine, and anandamide. And if you don't know much about the endocannabinoid system, you really need to focus on that. And any of you who have used marijuana, it's the THC that stimulates your endocannabinoid system for the feeling good that you get with that. But more importantly, you have anandamide, which is your endogenous endocannabinoid that you can stimulate your brain without weed, which is extremely deleterious, particularly to adolescents, as you know. So we also know that physical activity is hugely important at no matter the age, and it enhances cognitive function in randomized controlled studies, even in the middle-aged and the older. So what is the best antidepressant? It's not SSRIs, it's not marijuana, it's regular physical exercise. In double-blind randomized studies, exercise beats pharmacogenetic agents all the time, hands down. So let's talk a little bit about DNA and epigenetics, which you probably know a lot about, but it's the missing link between the 70% of diseases that we get environmentally and the 30% inherited DNA. So when my father died at 60, I figured that was my gauge, so to speak, and anything beyond that would be a bonus year. Well, I've got 20 bonus years now beyond that, due to the epigenetic utilization of environmentally healthy factors that he did not acquire and use. So you know that our genes are like a blueprint of a house laid out on a table to do nothing until they're acted upon. It's those epigenetic factors that tell your genes what proteins of the 100,000 they make to produce. So I mentioned pot use in pregnancy linked with kids' mental health issues. So, and we'll talk about the connectome a little bit, but basically when a woman smokes or drinks or uses drugs in pregnancy, epigenetic factors, methylation of the of the DNA affects the wiring, the connectome of the brain in the infant that can be transgenerational. And that's a whole nother lecture, but just know that it's not good. So let's look at various epigenetic factors. Nutrition, exercise, environment, and emotional health. If you eat a Big Mac for lunch today, wash it down, fed with beef, fed with corn from Iowa, fed on glyphosate, infused with antibiotics and hormones, and then wash it down with a bottle of phosphoric acid called Coke, and then have trans fatty acids on your French fries, it's going to tell your genes through transcription factors to make inflammatory cytokines. What's the common cause of cancer, heart disease, Alzheimer's, stroke? It's inflammation. If you don't exercise, the same thing happens in terms of inflammatory agents. Excess alcohol, environmental pollution, air, and emotional stress all elicits an inflammatory response in our body that contributes to the degenerative diseases that we acquire with aging, as contrasted with a Mediterranean diet, regular exercise, clean air, avoiding alcohol, tobacco, drugs, and emotional health, religion, relationships, meditation, spirituality. So here's a quiz. Where in the world do those people live the longest, the most centenarians, those people who live longer than 100 years of age? What are some of them? Well, if you look at them, it's Sardinia, Okinawa, the Seventh-day Adventists in Loma Linda, California, Costa Rica, in Icaria. Icaria is the island that Icarus plummeted into the sea by. So why do they live longer? Well, it's their epigenetic factors of their diet, their exercise and hard work, not treadmills or ellipticals. Their environment is relatively clean in terms of free of excess drugs, alcohol, and they have strong family units. Very strong family units, which reduces stress in middle age and older, and even the younger people. So let's talk about the spiritual side of the square. This is Father Ephraim, who is a spiritual leader of the Greek Orthodox Church and monasteries here in the United States, and recently deceased, actually. But he was a patient of mine, and he gave me this prayer rope. And he made a very good point. He says, what is the goal of all spiritual practices? And it's to gain some perspective on the greater purpose of our lives. So, the purpose of our lives, some say, is a life of purpose. But what is your passion? What is your purpose? What's your cause? What's your fundamental belief? Is there a higher being? What do you trust in? Is there something bigger than us? These are all questions that you need to deal with, confront in the life and death situations that you're going to soon confront with patience. You need to be balanced yourself and have some grasp on what you believe spiritually yourself. And I'm not proselytizing in any particular religion, but I want to give you an example of something that I do with patients. And this is the start of the Ironman triathlon, where you have 1,800 swimmers of all ages with an incredible day beginning with the booming of a cannon as the sun comes up over the mountains in the background, wondering if you're ever going to make it through the grueling day. And what I do and have been doing, I have a mantra. I have a a prayer that I repetitively say from Isaiah. And it's, he who trusts in the Lord shall be renewed. He shall rise up on wings like an eagle. He shall run and not be weary, and walk and not be fatigued. Well, I really use this as an homage, and it suppresses pain. And I focused on the part, he shall run and not be fatigued, and walk and not be weary, because I knew at the end I was going to be doing both and feeling that. Well, it's something I've said probably thousands of times in the races I've done. So what does that have to do with this nurse from Mercy Hospital who had this huge herniated disc here, causing severe radiculopathy, weakness of her foot, paralysis, and severe pain? Well, before surgery, I would often ask a patient, do you believe in God? And if they do, I will take their hand and ask them if they'd like to say a little prayer. And I say, today is the day the Lord hath made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. And with your help, get Mary or John back to their family and their good health and all that's good in their lives. That's it, 30 seconds. I can't tell you the number of patients who have sent me letters and come back and called, thanking me for that prayer, because imagine yourself sitting on a gurney, waiting to be rolled into an operating room for your brain to be operated upon, or your spinal cord. The tension, the worry, the cortisol level is sky high. By touching the patient, by communicating on a spiritual level, it reduces, and this has been shown, it reduces the cortisol level, reduces the anxiety, reduces the average length of stay in the hospital, reduces infections in patients. So it's a powerful modality. Well, when I turned her on her stomach to operate on her back, this is the tattoo that she had tattooed on her back. But those who wait on the Lord shall be renewed in their strength. And it's the same prayer that I've said 1,000 times. And I went out and I played the lottery this day, thinking that the possibility of this tattoo being there for my own, in my own background. And then I want to emphasize that most clinicians and patients are comfortable praying with patients. And you can see the numbers there yourself. 73% of medical students even. And again, I'm not one religion over another. It's just, there's a higher power, ladies and gentlemen, however you conceive of that in your own mind. What about the work side of the square? Well, this book by Csikszentmihalyi, Flow, The Ultimate Psychological Experience. In it, he says the best moments of our lives are when our mind or our body is stretched to its limits in the voluntary pursuit of something both difficult and worthwhile. When you are studying, you're totally focused. When you're doing an operation, you have to focus on what you're doing. When you're dealing with a patient, you have to think about their complaints, their history, do their physical. And it can be incredibly exhilarating and a flow experience. So Hans Selye, a physiologist, talked about the Adaptation Syndrome. And he said, with any stress, there are 3 different levels. There's the alarm, adaptation or resilience, and then exhaustion or death. So we need stress. We need adversity to get better. But recall, there's good stress or eustress, and then there's distress. You must be aware in your own mind where this point is. So what's a tachometer have to do with that? In my own life, every day I get into my car, I look at my tachometer, and I focus on the red zone, and I have a mental thermostat of my stress level, and I think how anxious, tense I am today. And I want to avoid being in the red zone, because as you know, that's when your engine overheats, burnout, and you flame out. So again, awareness, and be aware of where you are emotionally. I wasn't when I collapsed and ended up in a truck stop. The relationship side of the square, after one of the races I did, I went off to Hidden Valley, actually, here outside of Pittsburgh. And I thought, what's this all about? Why do you torture yourself training like that? What is it? Well, what are the three most important things in life? Physical and mental health. And you need to pay attention to your square to maintain your physical and mental health. Relationships with God, family, friends, and colleagues, and every day, carpe diem. Today is a gorgeous day in Pittsburgh. The sun's shining, the cumulus clouds are floating around, the blue sky. Look at it and take 10 seconds and enjoy it. For those contemplating marriage or in a marriage, you need to be aware of the work of John Gottman. He took individuals who were engaged to be married, put them in a visual, in a living situation, videotaped them, and then stressed them with various tests. And he found that in those that he could predict divorce 90% of the time by these four factors. When there was criticism, contempt, counterattack, or stonewalling, there was a 90% chance of not working in a marriage or ending up in divorce. So a few tips to keep in mind. And finally, it's terribly important to connect the dots in your life. Why you're sitting here at the University of Pittsburgh in medical school. How did that happen? And as I get older, I'm much more conscious of things, people that I meet that lead to circumstances for good and for bad. And what I want to talk about serendipity and from Kona to Kilimanjaro. So several years ago, I had finished the swim, 2.4 miles, 112-mile bike. I was on the marathon. It's in the darkened lava fields of Kona. I was completely fatigued, over waterlogged, hyponatremic from delusional hyponatremia, and actually somewhat delirious, ready to quit at mile 34. And correction, mile 14. And I heard behind me, click, 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 getting closer, the Doppler effect. And a hand reached out and touched me on the shoulder and said, "Hey, 272, you're too close to quitting. Come on, follow me. You only have a few more miles to go." What? He had no idea where I was, feeling, ready to quit, ready to be picked up by the sag wagon. And a car came down in the opposite direction, shined its light on these carbon fiber legs, the amputated arm. And it was Rajesh Dubal, the first triple amputee to ever finish the Hawaiian Ironman triathlon. I followed him, and serendipitously again, I actually ran into him accidentally in a restaurant the next day, and we became fast friends. And he finished the Ironman again last year. And so he called me 5 years ago, and said, "Joe, I'm taking a group of differently enabled athletes to climb Mount Kilimanjaro in Africa, and we'd like you to come as a team doctor." I said, "What do you mean by differently enabled athletes?" Well, I called my daughter, Isabella, who was in art school, and I said, "Would you like to go to Africa?" She said, "Will it get me out of school?" I said, "I think it will." So we spent 5 days and eventually summited Kilimanjaro. And at the very top, the differently enabled athletes were these gentlemen and this one young lady. And this man had one leg. He had no legs and one arm, one leg, phocomelia, no hands or arms. And again, severely young lady with PTSD that was incapacitating to her. And this young man, I couldn't figure out why he was carrying a golf club in his backpack. And he said, it's always been my dream to hit a golf ball off of the top of Mount Kilimanjaro. And he planted his tee and did just that. So what's the message? The message is that we must be strong and patient. We must meet failure and disappointment with courage, because you're going to fail, you're going to fall, and rise superior to the trials of life. Don't give in to despair and anxiety and depression, and cling to your principles and ideals. And that's where it's very important in terms of knowing just what your principles are, knowing what your ideals are, so that you'll be able to share these and heal yourself. As St. Luke said, physician, heal thyself. Oftentimes we have to do that. And I leave you with the bon voyage. And as Osler said, he said, while preaching a doctrine of equanimity and balance, I myself am a castaway. So I wish you all well, and I'm very pleased to answer any questions you may have.
Thanks so much, Dr. Maroon. Does anyone have any questions about that or want to share anything about their own experience or anything?
So
This is
Dr.
the book.
Maroon, I have a question.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, so I mean, neurosurgery is an incredibly difficult and time-staking career. How have you found the balance of having children, having a spouse during your neurosurgery training, and then as an attending, how have you been able to balance those two aspects of that relationship piece that you were talking about?
And that's an excellent question, and the real the real question to be asked. How do you do it? And what I tried to share with you, it sounds very, very good to have a balanced life, where your life is in balance as a square. Where you are now, where you are in residency, it's almost impossible to have equal sides to your square. But what's essential is to touch each sides of those squares on a daily basis and be aware of them. You must be aware of your family. You must be aware of the needs of your family, and hopefully with a good husband, good spouse, good fiance, there's understanding about your eventual goal and your purpose. And you get help there instead of conflict. The spiritual side of things, that gets into mindfulness. It gets into how to center yourself. It gets into how do you face when you're really in the middle of stressful situation. Does your epinephrine levels get completely out of control? How do you bring yourself back into balance? The physical side of that, for me, was critical. I wouldn't be here if I didn't go for that run around the high school track. So it's essential for those who can to get some physical activity in on a daily basis, even if it's taking the stairs in Scaife Hall instead of the elevators. It's getting 20 or 30 minutes of some kind of physical activity in. Resistance bands. We have a gym in the neurosurgical residence quarters now to facilitate the ease of getting a workout for 20 or 30 minutes. You don't have to do triathlons. So by being aware of those sides, the work is always going to be seemingly all-consuming. But it was all-consuming for me, and it really led to really catastrophic consequences emotionally and personally. So what I guess the takeaway is the perspective, the big picture, of what I presented to you as someone in the fourth quarter, actually someone in overtime now. And myself looking back over experiences, sharing them with you for what you can glean from that and apply to your own circumstances. So that would be my response to that question.
Thank you, sir.
And the book that is up, is it still up, Kat?
No, it's not. Go back one.
Can you come here a second?
Won't let you go back one.
Okay. Anyway, I put this book together, Square One. It's an address I gave several years ago to the Congress of Neurological Surgeons. I was the president of that particular society, and I had to give the presidential address, which was the hardest talk I've ever had to give in my life. And I talked about the square. And I've given hundreds of talks since then that absolutely no one remembers anything I've ever said in any of those talks, I don't think. But people will come up to me now 20 years later and talk to me about the square. You know, how's your square, Joe? So I've summarized it in this book that's available at maroonsquare1.com. That may be something worthwhile for you to get and kind of put together the information that I shared with you. Any other questions?
Yeah, I have a question. So at least in my limited experience, one of the most challenging parts of becoming a physician is almost the never-endingness of it. There's all these
never-ending what?
Just the fact that it seems to be almost never-ending. You have to go through the preclinical years and your clinical years and residency, fellowship, and there's just so much more always on the horizon. I'm speaking as somebody who is just summiting the clinical years and is very excited to get into the hospitals, but I find myself almost compromising different parts of my life with this expectation that at some point I'll be able to elongate my relationship line or elongate my physical line. But it's hard to know when that's going to happen with looking into the horizon and only seeing training for the foreseeable future. How do you get yourself to work on the different aspects of it in the moment, while also recognizing that during medical training, it can be almost impossible to have a balanced life?
That's a wonderful, I compliment you on your introspection and your ability to articulate your observations in such an eloquent way. And I really mean that, because you've encapsulated what medicine is all about. I'm reluctant to say, but I guess I'm not anymore. I'm 81 years of age. I can't wait to come into the hospital on a daily basis. I saw 10 patients this morning before this lecture, and I was challenged on each one of these patients diagnostically to put the neuroimaging, the history, the physical examination all together to come up with a diagnosis and a treatment that would alleviate pain. Hippocrates said the first responsibility of a physician is to prevent disease. That being impossible, to cure it, and that too being impossible, to relieve pain. And I broadened that because what you're learning at every stage are opportunities to prevent disease, to cure diseases, and to relieve pain in some way. Now, what I'm really saying is you must have a burning desire to learn. I'm every day, I'm learning, just interacting with you. I'm learning an immense amount, just listening to you articulate your own feelings. And I you know, there was a book many years ago entitled The Magnificent Obsession. And that's what medicine can be and is for many people, where it can completely take over your life. Your observation is so crucial to not making it completely dominant. So your responsibilities are so immense in the preclinical and the clinical years. It's such an enjoyment to get into the clinical years, dealing with patients, interacting. You know, it's a daily learning experience. Your own feelings, your own emotions, your own knowledge applied to a human being to help relieve pain or help them. And so it's just awareness. It's the big picture. It's reaching out to your boyfriend, girlfriend, spouse, whatever, and knowing to connect and maintaining, honestly, the physical side, I cannot emphasize enough. And the purpose, you know, what is your purpose? What are you looking to do in medicine? And how can you best use your talents, your own unique abilities to get there? And it's awareness and mindfulness. Like I said from the very beginning, I'm not a wise man or teacher. I'm a finger pointing to reality of what you're immersed in on a daily basis, and making suggestions on how to deal with it. So I hope that that provides some answer in a broad way.
It's exciting to hear how passionate you are about being a physician so many years later. I hope that I'm that excited to go to work.
When you're 80.
Yes.
Well, it is. And yeah, the diagnostic and the whatever field you might choose, it's to be, there's a quote that I read recently. It's not the pleasant or unpleasant experiences or the sum of the difference that makes one happy or satisfied in its life. It's how meaningful and worthwhile your life is and has been. So it's, you know, it's man's search for meaning and worthwhile. So it's how meaningful, how worthwhile. And again, Khalil Gibran he was a poet in Lebanon who wrote a book, The Prophet. And he said, we give but little when we give of our possessions. It's when we give of ourselves that we truly give. And in medicine, you're able to give of your total self. You're not like a lawyer in an adversarial situation, fighting or arguing with somebody every day. You're dwelling, you're recalling all of your information, all of your personal experiences, all of your emotional experiences, and then with your neuroplasticity funneling like a laser beam at a patient, to a patient, to help somebody else. That is meaningful and worthwhile.
Thank you. Also, I'm just hoping I'll be this excited in 5 years.
You will be. Day at a time. Carpe diem. Seize the day. Don't look 5 years down the road. Don't look 5 years down the road. Do the very best. And that's another good lesson. I'm rambling a little bit here. You know, people ask me, what should I go into? What should I do? Where should I go for my residency? The residents, I mentor a lot of residents. If you do a good job, and this is William Osler again, do a good job every day, the best you can, opportunities present themselves, situations occur that will make it easier and easy for you to make those decisions. It's taking one day at a time and doing your very best every day. Things happen that you cannot predict or even conceive of talking to me right now that will open up your future if you live in daytime compartments and do your best every day.
Thank you.
Okay?
All right. Yes. Thank you so much, Dr. Moon.
Thank you for your attention. Thank you for being the few who signed up, but I hope it was worthwhile for you.
Thank you for your time. And thank you everyone for coming. I hope that was helpful, informative, fun, a combination of the three. All right. That's it. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Bye.